Welcome to my series of conversations with Stalwarts in music. I'm delighted to be hosting this very special episode for the simple reason being it's an exclusive interview with the guitar legend, Mr. Joe Satriani. My guest today is singularly acknowledged as a maestro, virtuoso in the guitar traditions of music. He's equally acquitted himself with grandeur, with credit, and universal applause in his role as an arranger, music educator, having built bridges of sensibilities in the world. He has had over 15 Grammy nominations, sold 10 million albums worldwide, which makes him probably the most prolific instrumental guitar player of all time. To top it off, he has trained legends like Steve Vai, Kirk Hammett, Charlie Hunter, and several many musicians worldwide. He's played with the legendary Deep Purple, Chickenfoot, and the supergroup G3, and many musicians in his rather illustrious career. Today's episode is being sponsored by Wire Up, which is a wonderful music retail store based out of Bangalore. You get the best of musical instruments. You can also opt for your musical instrument of your choice through the e-commerce platforms. If you happen to be in Bangalore, don't forget to hop into Vira. I'm delighted to welcome my guest for today, Mr. Joe Satriani.
Hello.
Hi, Joe. Namaste. How are you?
Very good. How are you today?
Very well. I'm just super stoked to be having this privilege to be talking to you.
Thank you. Same here. What would you like to know?
Great. So I have a couple of interesting questions as part of our agenda today. So my first question for you, you've studied music under the mentorship of several great masters that include Mr. Bell Westcott from high school and then bebop pioneer Lenny Tristano. Yeah. From your learnings, you have expanded on the idea of music. In what ways has this happened in terms of enlarging the circle of understanding and the application of music that you follow and teach?
Oh, the two gentlemen you mentioned were so remarkably different. Bill Westcott was in the early 70s, a very young Juilliard graduate, still in his 20s. And so he was kind of a fun teacher to have in a high school for a bunch of us young kids who were, into Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, Hendrix, that kind of stuff. He could relate to us, but he had this fantastic classical music education. Mm-hmm. And he was also a jazz pianist, I think, on the side. And those two worlds were something that we didn't have because we were rock and roll kids,
Sure.
And so we kind of really fit together very well. He taught me all the concepts that the great classical composers of Europe had been using for a few hundred years. Wow. That I heard in my ear, but I never knew there was method or theory behind it. Probably the most notable of all those theories was the pitch axis theory, mm-hmm. Which was a shift from changing key signatures, mm-hmm. And modulating to different areas of the 12 tone system and giving the listener one key focal point, one key note, and then revolving the keys around that one note. It was a very interesting concept that sounded normal to my, teenage ear, because I had heard rock musicians using that concept more than I had heard classical composers. But he opened me up to a whole world of what we call classical music, where all these incredible concepts of harmony had already been done. I mean, for a few hundred years, these composers had worked the 12 tones. And, as kids, we only knew a couple of classical pieces. We didn't really know the depth of what was pioneered in Europe at the time. And this was extremely important to understand that these concepts were for us too. They were tools that were not elitist tools. A 14-year-old guitar player could use them as well. So this had a big impact on me. I turned all those lessons in music theory into self-guitar lessons, and then started teaching other kids what I had been interpreting through Bill. Then a few years later, I meet Lenny Tristano, and this guy is from another world entirely. He has the same knowledge as Bill. He was much older than Bill, and he was really a jazz age person. He was completely blind. He was a bebop musician, father of cool jazz, first guy to ever record, rehearse, perform freeform jazz with the band. He did so many things first, but he was quite a character. He was an unusual human being to be in the same room with. And, he talked like a cartoon character. He acted like one. And he was extremely opinionated and headstrong. But at the same time, he was a musical genius, and he was kind and nurturing to all young musicians from every style. Even a kid like me who walked in, with Johnny Winter and Black Sabbath and, stuff like that. He had an open ear and an open heart, and, really taught me how to exist as a musician. I think this is probably the biggest lesson. I mean, there were lessons about how to practice, learn everything and all that kind of stuff. But, whereas Bill was teaching me as an uneducated musician, learning about scales and chords and how to write symphonies and things like that, I was already a player by the time that I met Lenny. So he was really trying to look at me and say, you're rudderless. You think you're a musician, but you're not. You think you're playing the way you feel, but you're not. And he was trying to strip away all the layers of neurosis and self-doubt and falsehoods that you build up to get through life every day, and try to teach musicians how to be themselves, but not lie to themselves about what they need to know, what they need to learn, and then how not to fool themselves into thinking they're really playing. It's so deep. I could talk about it for weeks. It's very difficult to explain, but the process is a stripping down of style, of affectation, and getting down to your core personality about what are the notes that you want to play, and don't judge yourself as you play them. And that is like some kind of weird bebop Zen lesson. It was so
truly inspiring.
Very inspiring, but very difficult to grasp as 18-year-old kid. It's very hard. But the lessons from those two guys, I lean on them every day that I play. It's amazing. It's as if I'm still working on them.
I'm sure you've been molded into an incredible musician today because of all the hustle and the hard work that you put in. I would also like to know, is there a need for a moral framework before you approach music? Or does practice and discipline enable an individual to develop moral imperative? What follows and what precedes, according to you?
I think it goes back and forth. I think Mother Nature, I think, plays with luck in the funniest way. And I think sometimes it's kind of a cruel reality that you can be so totally prepared and completely unlucky, and then the guy next to you can be so lucky and completely unprepared for the luck. So sometimes things do land in your lap, but I think that, or after my years of living on the planet, that my advice to everyone is prepare for good luck, because if and when it comes and you're prepared, that is the best thing that could happen to you. And if it passes you by, it may never return again. And so I know I'm speaking in abstract, but I mean, if I wanted to be specific, I would tell a guitar player, you have to learn where every note is on the guitar, on every string. You have to learn every scale, the name, what it sounds like, and the effect it has on your audience. The same goes for chords, and which chords go together, and when to use chords when they're in the same key, how to use chords when they're out of key, how to get back. Again, all of this, no rules, it's cause and effect. If I'm playing a song to you right now, right? Let's say I grab this guitar and I say, I'm going to play you a song about a beautiful bird. And I go, you'd be like, well, that doesn't sound very beautiful.
For sure.
That's because, see, that had an effect on you. It's not that it's right or that it's wrong. Mm-hmm. It's just that perhaps I didn't plan on the effect it might have. So how do you teach somebody to learn about that? You say, well, you got to try it out. You've got to play in front of people. I mean, musicians make music for people. That's what we do. So that's our job, really. It's not becoming famous, not even getting good. Our job really is to make music for our fellow human beings. So that means that we have to understand all of the tools we have, mm-hmm. and when do we use those tools? When a carpenter goes to make a chair, he uses certain tools to make a chair so people, when they sit down, it doesn't crash to the ground. You know what I mean?
Correct.
So when an engineer is designing an airplane, it's got to use the right tools to keep that airplane flying, right? So a musician's got to figure out, what are my tools? So it's a funny realization, because I guess when you get attracted to music, it might be for a social reason. You know, you want to get the girl, you want to impress your friends, you want to make money, you want to be famous, all this kind of stuff. But actually what's happening is people are listening to you because they like what they hear, and that's about it. If you don't look right, but they like your music, they'll get used to the way you look. You know what I mean? They just want the music. So musicians have to understand that they've got to hold on to these tools, notes, individual notes, notes together, melody, harmony, and time, rhythm. And they've got to understand, what is the effect of this on my audience? When I want people to get up and dance, what do? A slow song with dissonance? No. You do an up-tempo song where there isn't a lot of challenge going on, and you want people to feel aggressive. Well, then you use aggressive notes, If you want people to think of love, you use love notes, This is extremely important. And I would say that that's part of preparing for good luck. Mm-hmm. Because when someone says, oh, you over there, what have you got to show me? You want to be ready, Very, very beautifully articulated, especially the reference of the song that you tried to, the example that you quoted is wonderful, wonderful. You had a very illustrious career spanning over many decades. What do you think really worked well for you? What was that eureka moment when you felt like, I've done it? I don't think that's ever come. But there are lots of small moments, I think, where you feel an indescribable joy that you've reached somebody. And sometimes, it's in front of, 50,000 people, and they're singing your melody, and you can't believe it, because you remember when you wrote that melody. Maybe you were in a small room in your apartment and you were having a series of conflicting feelings, and you opened your heart to, write this melody and not be embarrassed, to show your feelings. And then all of a sudden, a few years later, you're, playing it in front of 40,000 people in a stadium in Portugal, and everyone's got their lighters up and they're singing it. And it's a moment that really touches your heart,
For sure.
And so there are those moments. And then there are the private ones when people tell you that, maybe a loved one passed and they were a fan and they put, a copy of your album in the casket when they were buried because it was so important to them, or they used a particular song when they got married, or, things like that are just really, really touching and heartbreaking at the same time. But it reminds you that what you're doing is extremely vital. I'm not going to use the word important, because that can make you feel like you're important, and that's not a good thing. But it's vital. In other words, it's while we're here for our short lives, we have to share our experience,
Sure.
our bewilderment of life. You know what I mean? I mean, it's really about sharing, because we come and then we go. And so if you can help somebody along just by saying, this was my experience, maybe it'll help yours. That when you recognize that you've been part of something like that, that's a beautiful moment.
Sure. There's something very mystical about your music. Does it sort of lead you to a proclivity of interest to other aspects of the mystical?
I think so. I think I'm more, today I think I am more fascinated by the fact that humans gravitate towards it in the face of any absence of proof. It's sort of like a curious thing. It's like when you see a cat bewildered as it looks in a mirror and it plays with itself. It doesn't understand what's happening. Or a dog is looking at a television screen and seeing an image of another dog, and they can't quite figure out what's happening. They don't know what a flat screen television is. They don't know if the image is coming from the internet, Netflix, YouTube, network television. They don't know any of that. So in a way, we're kind of bewildered in the same way. We know now that we're on a planet and it's part of the solar system. We revolve around the sun. In a few 100 billion years, the sun's going to burn out, and we're just part of trillions of little solar systems, and we have no idea where we are. We literally don't know where we are, and no one actually has any proof as to how we got here or where we're going. So, that's pretty intense. But then you go, okay, well then how come we imagine things like leprechauns and fairies and gremlins and ghosts and aliens with, funny shaped eyes and teeny bodies. And, why do we do that? And it's really a funny thing about us. And it's just, I think if a more advanced being came and looked at us, they would look at us like a cat playing with some yarn, thinking it's alive, or a dog barking at the moon, or, it would be just this, they'd go, oh, cute little humans. They imagine so many things that aren't there, When I was younger, I was really serious about these things because I grew up in a Roman Catholic home, and I was in a Catholic school for 5 years, and disillusioned as I got older. Investigated every kind of religion you could think about, and arrived at a point in my life where I thought that humans are important, that you just have to be good to each other, and that's the best religion that there is.
Sure.
So yeah, it's really funny. I think that the mystical side of the music actually is really a reflection of my quest for understanding. Just like most people on the planet, everybody at some point looks up at the night sky and says, what are we doing here?
Let's talk a little bit about your new album, The Elephants of Mars. The song Faceless has got a very groovy rhythm section with a classic Josat melody to top it off with. Right? Guitar is an instrument which has comparatively lesser sonority compared to instruments like a violin or a saxophone. Have you ever considered using MIDI guitars with tones like an organ or a sax? Is there room for such a thing in your music?
Yeah, I've done it a few times on albums, and it's been tucked in with the mix. Sometimes people think I'm playing keyboards, but actually it's a MIDI guitar. But ultimately, I think what turns me on the most is hearing, my fingertip on the string. That's what separates all guitar players from each other, is that actual interaction between their finger and whatever instrument they're playing. As soon as you eliminate that, you've eliminated something that is part of your personality. And you will have to work harder to get people to recognize you. It's very similar to, let's say, when you hear, the Boston Pops Orchestra play a Beatles song, you listen to it and you go, oh, well, that's nice. But that's not the Beatles. I don't hear John Lennon's voice. I don't hear Ringo's drumming, George Harrison and Paul McCartney singing along with John. I don't hear any of that. So where'd that go? It's missing. You see what I mean? Because as my generation grew up listening to that, and that was what we were attracted to, was them doing it. You know what I mean? Their voices, their fingers on those strings. It's not, they were not at the musical level as concert violinists are, the high level of musicianship, the standard they're held to. But that has never stopped anybody from liking someone else's music. What we want, again, as I said before, is we want to hear each individual story about life, and it's there in the fingertip, you see. So my quest has always been to try to get more of me to come out of the speakers when people hear my music. And when we were working on Faceless, that's exactly what I was trying to do, is I'm trying to get more Joe to come out of the speakers. And I don't mean more notes. What I'm saying is more of me, my personality. So people, as soon as they hear it, they go, that's Joe. He's talking to me. He's telling me a story, it's a really odd thing, because I know behind me you can see traditional amplifiers and speakers and stuff, but on the album I didn't use any of them. I used a plugin called SansAmp for all my guitar sounds, and that was an unusual step for me to do. I didn't start out thinking that's how the record was going to wind up, but the reason why we wound up choosing all those tracks was because more of me came out of those tracks than the tracks where we had put the guitar through those traditional amplifiers. So that has been my quest on many albums, is to just get more. It sounds fun. I don't know really how to say it, but in other words, I really want people to know instantly that it's me and my fingers on the guitar string as soon as the song starts. So I wouldn't, although it's fun to play with the MIDI instruments, you're basically trading away your personality when you do that. And it may be fun for the musician. I don't know if it's that much fun for the listener.
Being a guitar player is one single dimension of your life. You've dabbled in composition, you've dabbled in production. If you could be other things other than being a guitar player, what might you be?
It has been so long that I've been a musician that it's really hard to imagine. I would do anything to survive. I would do anything to make sure that my family was safe and taken care of and looked after and provided for. So, whatever it is, I'd be fine with it. I think, I don't know if I'd be good at it. That's the problem. Right?
I'm sure you'd be.
Yeah, I'd like to think I'd be, a nuclear physicist, but would I be any good at it? I don't know. I don't think, there are things that I don't think I'd want to do. I think being in really harsh physical environments wouldn't be so much fun. So being a logger or working on an oil rig in the middle of the ocean, those are very dangerous, difficult jobs. And I'm not sure I'd, do that. I think I'd rather be a bartender at a beach resort. That might be fun. a little bit more relaxing.
For sure.
Tour guide and is somewhere really nice. But I mean, I started playing drums when I was 9, and I switched to guitar when I was 14. And so I've always been a musician as far as I can tell.
Wonderful. Your album Shape Shifting from back in 2020, this track with a very fancy title, Ali Farka, Dick Dale, and Alien, and me. Right? This particular song has a West African influence to it. How did that composition come about for someone like you who's been into surf rock and that sphere of music?
I was playing around with some unusual electronic loops one day, and I came across this rhythm that, although was very, very robotic and electronic sounding, the actual rhythmical parts were very North African sounding. And so I started playing this sort of Ali Farka Touré style guitar over it. And I had this image in my mind of a really cool party that I wish would have happened, where it's, late at night out in a beautiful oasis out in the desert, North Africa. And everyone's having a party, and we just happen to be there together, Ali Farka Touré and Dick Dale and myself, and an alien comes down while we're all jamming and plays with us. And it was such a humorous science fiction sort of idea, but at the same time, I thought, wouldn't that be great, to be able to play guitar with these other two great guitar players, and totally. You'd have to really stretch your imagination to imagine that could actually happen. But I thought, what if it did happen? What would we do? And so I thought, well, Ali Farka would play a little bit, and then you'd look at me to play something, and I'd look at Dick Dale, and he would play his thing. And so I just started building the song based on this crazy little idea that I had. And, a little bit of humor in there. But at the same time, it's really hard to play like other people. The Dick Dale thing is like, wow, that's really different. You can play scales up and down the neck and everything, but it's more finesse, and his thing is more muscular. And the rhythmic style of Ali Farka Touré, very unusual for somebody like me who grew up in New York, not being exposed to that kind of music. So it was really a great challenge for me to be able to pay homage to these great players and somehow figure out how we could hand off, the song to each other in the course of the song, and then eventually play together at the end. So, I love the idea of doing a song like that, where you get to pay homage to your heroes and maybe introduce the idea to your fans that they should go listen to these people,
Sure. Completely blew my mind. That particular track was just incredible.
Thank you.
You've had major blues influence in your music, and you're a highly skilled technical innovator, and you have the blues element throughout, no matter what. How important is it for any musician to go back to his or her roots?
Well, I would think no matter where you're from, you're going to have some kind of musical roots. At some point, you're a baby, and then you're a kid, and you grow up and you hear music. Your parents, your siblings, your friends, your community is playing music. And whether you have any control over it or not, it becomes part of your roots, And I think expressing that is important for two reasons. Number one, you're showing other people who you are, and people are interested in that. They want to know your story, your unique story when they listen to your music. And the other thing is that I think you're really exploring yourself, because locked in our brains, I think is a whole beautiful, mound of memories. I do believe that our brains have remembered everything from our childhood. We can't consciously really get to it because I think our survival depends on us forgetting quite a bit of life so that we can take in the present and act accordingly for survival. But somewhere in there are all the memories of us growing up. And they're, most of them are pretty innocent. You're just laying there as a kid, but your grown-ups are around you. They're watching you. They're listening to music. They're laughing, talking, arguing. They're doing all kinds of things that humans do. And you're there growing up, and it's in your DNA. You know what I mean? And so when you reach back and you try to explore that, I think you unlock little bits of your memory, and you learn to understand more about yourself. And you experience a deeper version of life, I think. You know what I mean? Because I think if you don't really understand your past, and where you come from, you're living a shallower kind of existence. As I said before, it's a kind of a one-way trip. We come, we're here, and we're gone. and so you might as well, try to live as deeply as possible. And part of that is understanding your roots. And so for me, all that music I grew up listening to, my parents, jazz and classical, my older siblings, rock and roll, blues, funk, rock, all that stuff. It's all in here, and it's all part of me.
Wonderful. In the interest of time, I have one last question for you.
Okay. Down
in the distant horizon, what would you like to be remembered as, Mr. Satriani?
Oh, I don't require anyone to remember me.
It was very modest.
I think, I think but actually I'm just more concerned that, my wife and son remember me as someone who loved them unconditionally. So that's the most important thing. And I was a good friend to my friends. But the career part of it, that's okay. I'll move on, and then I'll make room for younger musicians to come along.
Lovely take to it. So before we leave, this interview is also going to be on my all-new podcast, In Conversations with Stalwarts in Music, which I'm going to be launching in the next couple of days. So great. Before we leave, could you give a concluding note for the people of India who are going to be listening to our lovely interview?
Oh, well, this is Joe Satriani saying hello to all my fans in India. I'm so thrilled and happy that you still listen to my music, and I hope to return someday to play more concerts.
On that note, I'd love to host you in India. Please do stay in touch. This was an incredible privilege for me to be doing this interview with you. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Satriani.
Thank you.
Take care and stay safe.
Yes, thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.